All right, good morning, everybody, and welcome to our bass fishing sectional managers meeting. I'm going to, well, my name's Kurt Gibson, and I'm going to share my screen here. All right, I think you can see that. Now you can't. It went away. Okay, there we go. So again, welcome everybody to our meeting this morning. We found there to be some value in bringing everybody together about a month ahead of the sectional to discuss some of the things that'll go into your planning. And I know we've got a number of folks who are veterans of helping us run these events, and we certainly appreciate all your help. I've got everybody muted at the moment just because it tends to make the general course of business run a little more smoothly. But if you have questions, you can either raise your hand through the feature on Teams, or you can go into the chat. We'll make sure that we answer your questions. And if we can't answer your question today, I'll make sure that when we follow up tomorrow, we've got answers to those questions. But hopefully these are some of the, high level topics that people typically wonder about. How do the details come out, and how is the event, the bass fishing sectional, actually run? And I'll begin by saying, we're doing this together on April 7th, and the sectionals aren't until May 6th. Who knows where our state will be between now and then? And if things change, whether it's, regarding some of the topics we'll discuss, maybe involving how many people can be involved and spectators and mass, if and as things change, we're going to communicate that to our schools and certainly to you, our managers. And hopefully there won't be a whole lot of change between now and then, unless it's to the better. We'll just have to see what happens. But I'm going to go ahead and move through our presentation here. So our sectional dates is May 6th, and the rain date will be Monday, May 10th. We have secured permits for these events. Our contact with the Department of DNR has been working on that. And our DNR contact will also be working with a site supervisor, hopefully, fingers crossed, to get in touch with you regarding specifics for your event so they can help with boat checks. I want to talk about some things we'd ask you to do pre-tournament. You should have already received, and if you haven't, you will be, what we call a sectional information sheet. There's a couple of key areas on that form, and you'd be getting that from Laura Hennings, my assistant, who's on the meeting with us today, that we need you to review and update as necessary. Eventually, we'll put all this together for each site. You'll get a copy that you can send out to the schools that are assigned to your sectional, and all those assignments are posted online. And then we will link these once we've got them all on that assignments page on our website. We will also be, so that's really probably the most important and most immediate thing that you'll need to be working on if you haven't gotten that done already. We will be sending you next week, the week of April 12th, then some information. It'll be 2 emails, or it'll be 2 attachments, I should say. One will be for the 3 boats that qualify out of the sectional tournament that you're hosting, and then one for the 4th place boat, the alternate boat. And it'll probably just be a 1-page document that gives those qualifiers, the 3 qualifying boats, and then there's a separate sheet for the alternate. We'd ask you to give that to those boats. It's sort of our first way to communicate with them after the sectional. It gives them a couple of real high-level things to keep in mind and to be on the lookout for or to get familiar with. There will also be information about the state finals on our website, and we'll make sure that the 1-pager that we're asking you to hand out directs folks to our website where they can find the information, all the information they need to know for the state finals. So that is a couple of things on the pre-tournament that you can be working on. Some more things. If you haven't already done so, we'd ask that you review the manager's manual, and that can be found on our bass fishing page. If you go into the center column of that page and look down under information, you'll see a link that says Manual for Schools and Managers. That really contains the A to Z of how the tournament should be conducted. We've also created this year, and this will be posted probably beginning tomorrow, but even though it may not be posted right away, you're going to get a copy of this tomorrow. I've created, or our office has created rather, what we're calling a manager's supplement. In this year of COVID, and we're going to talk about a few COVID things here in a bit, we've put together this sort of supplemental document that hopefully will answer some questions that people have about, well, how are we supposed to do this with COVID? This document's intended to help answer some of those questions. So you'll get a copy of that tomorrow. It'll also be posted on our website, but you're going to get a copy of it tomorrow when we follow up following this meeting. I think it's also really important, I know I mentioned this a couple of times, but it's really important that in all your communications with schools and at your coaches meeting, you're reviewing the COVID mitigations that we have in place. And I would just sort of share here that I think it's really critical that we're all sending a good message to the participants. You know, we could probably take a poll and ask everybody how do they feel about, you know, where things are at and the this and then that and the other, but we really don't have that option. We're the people in authority helping us. You know, you folks are running these events, we are, and you know, we've got to set the right example for folks. So we really need you to emphasize that as well to the teams and the personnel that you'll have working alongside you at the sectional tournaments. We have to sort of put our personal biases aside and do what's being asked of us, because at the end of the day, it really is for the students. More on that to follow. You're also going to want to remind schools that when they bring their team rosters to you, that they are signed by the school's principal. As you're reaching out to the participating schools in advance of the sectional, I'd really hammer that point. Just as a reminder, students can only be on one roster, so you'll want to point that out to coaches if you see somebody's, you know, school's trying to have somebody on both. If they have 2 boats, they can't have the same person on both rosters. You'll also want to appoint a tournament committee in case there's any violation of the terms and conditions. You'll want to have a tournament committee to review whatever the infraction may have been. You as manager will be on that group as well. We have a form that if somebody does want to file an appeal that the terms and conditions were violated, I would have a couple of those on hand at the event so somebody can complete that. Don't just let somebody say, well, I saw this happen and I want to appeal. Make them fill out a form. Then you would get your committee together, talk to whomever, conduct your investigation, and eventually you got to render a decision. We'll share our number, or I'll be sharing my number with you. If you need to get a hold of me, you can, but really, you are the folks in charge at that event, and your committee's there for that reason if something happens. We've been fortunate. This kind of thing hasn't reared its head in bass fishing, but you'll want to have a group on hand ready in case something does unfold. Now, the next bullet point, that third from the bottom, if we get closer to the 6th and you've got concerns about your site, or are looking at the weather forecast and you have questions or concerns, let's stay in touch. At the end of the day, I'm not going to make you fish at your location if you don't think it's safe. We want it to be a safe event. And so if we have a rain date for that very purpose. I think the big thing when I think about weather, and that I would encourage you to remind all the participating coaches about, is in our terms and conditions, it says that a sectional tournament or one day at the state finals is considered an official day if 2.5 hours of fishing occurs. The minimum amount of time you can set your tournament for is 5 hours. And that's one of the things you'll be asked to complete on that sectional information sheet, is you'll tell us, we're going to fish from this starting time to this ending time. And that can't be any longer than 8 hours. A lot of times people say we're going to fish from 7 to 3. But if you decided you wanted to fish from 8 to 2, you could do that. The minimum amount of time that you can set as your sectional, however, is 5 hours. And so half of that is 2.5 hours. And that's how we come up with that 2.5 hour mark, makes a tournament official. So and I would say, if it's me, I'm reminding people that whether the weather looks beautiful when you start or whether it looks crummy. If we fish for 2.5 hours today, everybody, we've got an official tournament on our hands. I mentioned already having a copy of the appeal form ready. I'd have copies of the boat safety check available. Sometimes the DNR or the site superintendents have them. Sometimes they don't. It's just good to have those on hand as a backup. And then probably the most important thing you need to do before the event is develop your emergency evacuation plan. Have the cell phone numbers for each boat. Have numbers for coaches if they're not out on the water. Have a clearly articulated plan for how people are to get off the lake if weather presents itself. And if that means you've got to create some safe harbors at different locations because of where people may go to fish, do that. But if you do that, then you're going to want to make sure you've got people at those safe harbors so they can make sure you can account for everybody when they come in. I know we take a similar approach to that at the state finals. We've got 6 or 7 places, and when we know we're going to be clearing the lake, we send people out to all of those with a checklist of all the boat numbers, and we just check them off, and we're communicating back to sort of a home base. So make sure you've got a clear plan and you articulate that to people well in advance. Now, on the day of the event, as I mentioned, you're going to want to have cell phone numbers for everybody. Really important in that coaches meeting that you'll conduct before you start sending people into the water or getting boats launched. Being back on time for weigh-ins. We do have penalties in the terms and conditions for being back late. Make sure you communicate that to folks and really emphasize you have to be back on time. Again, discuss the emergency evacuation plans. Announce if there will be any off-limit areas, and there may be some at your location. Announce any water or boating or motor restrictions. That's also going to be in your sectional information sheet, but it's a good reminder. Remind folks that there are no additional boats that can be put in the water by schools, not a fan boat or anything. It's, they have 2 boats. If they're going to enter 2 boats, then that's all they can put in the water. Explain to them if they do have a boat roster, only 2 students can fish at a time. And if they have a roster that has more than 2 students, they have their max of 4, for example, and they want to make some substitutions during the day, they can do that, but just explain to them where that needs to occur. Make sure if they're going to make a substitution that you've got somebody from your staff there to make sure that everything goes well. They're not bringing something onto a boat they shouldn't. There's nothing fancy going on or fishy going on in the live wells, whatever. But you're going to want to make sure you witness that exchange of people. Identify who that tournament committee would be. Remind coaches if there's an appeal, it's got to be made prior to the conclusion of the weigh-ins. Doing something after the weigh-ins isn't going to be accepted by you. Hopefully that doesn't rear itself, as I mentioned. And then things to do, after the weigh-ins are done. We want you to distribute the awards. We'd like you to do that in a non-contact fashion. So what we're envisioning is that you've created a space at the weigh-in area where you have the trophies, or the plaque, I should say, and any medals on a table, clearly identified, and you can just say the winning school was, whatever, and say we'd like one member of the team to come on up and pick up your awards over here. And some of these mitigations that we're going to talk about, I know you're going to hear from people, because I have, in all sports, our entire staff has. Well, so and so's been running these. These kids have been at fishing tournaments all year. They haven't had to do any of these things, or they were at this kind of tournament, haven't had to do any of these kinds of things. And the answer is you're 100% right. For non-school events, it's been made very clear to us in our discussions with state government that the state really doesn't care what these non-school groups are doing, whether they're following state guidelines and mitigations or what. Our events, though, have additional eyeballs on them. We've started to get some pushback from state government already about, you may have heard about the spike in some of the COVID numbers around the state, where our office is getting some pushback because the state's trying to make us believe that some of these outbreaks can be tied back to interscholastic sport. We haven't seen that or gotten that really feeling from our schools, but my point is IHSA events are going to be more scrutinized than any other group's fishing tournament, any other group's baseball tournament or basketball. It doesn't matter. An IHSA event is going to be more scrutinized than anything else. So this idea of non-contact distribution of awards is important. Anything we can do to keep space and keep people from mingling and making sure we're wearing protective face coverings, it's just going to make incredible points for us. And it's the expectation that we're setting for people. You'll be able, after the event then, to post results from the tournament online. You'll get sort of a how-to sheet on how to make that happen. And we'd ask that, if possible, that you find a way to get us all the rosters that were submitted back to our office at some point. We've been trying to track, this has been a really big topic for the advisory committee. Bass fishing has grown by just a tremendous amount in the coming up. We're not quite at 15 years, but we're approaching that. It's really exceeded our expectations, and it's grown to the point where we're trying to figure out how we best manage that growth. And it feels like we're not too many years away from having, whether we call it a regional tournament or not, but having another round in the state series. So we might, in the very near future, have like a regional tournament, which will advance some qualifiers to a sectional tournament, which will advance qualifiers to a state finals tournament. But one thing that helps us knowing, are we getting closer to that point, is knowing how many actual boats are being entered in the state series. So that's one of the reasons why we asked to get those back from you after the event. Okay, let's talk about some COVID adjustments. And like I said, a lot of these things are going to be in that supplement that we send you tomorrow. We've already talked about having the right, the right frame of mind and setting the right example. I can't emphasize enough the importance of making sure all your people are wearing masks. Again, regardless of what their personal bias might be, regardless of whether they've been vaccinated fully or not, we need to just set the right example on that. I would say, if you receive any complaints about the COVID mitigations that we've posted online or that we're going to have in place for the tournament, please feel free to make a note and send them to me afterwards, or direct people to me. You don't have to be the person answering all these things or whatnot. If I can take the load off you, I'll be happy to do so, but you just got to let me know or direct people back to me. Spectators. Here we are, like I said in the beginning, it's April 6th or April 7th rather. We're literally a month out before the sectionals. The way even in phase 4 and even the bridge that we might find ourselves in by then, it's really not going to allow for spectators at these events. So I think it's important that we're communicating that to our schools in advance. Barring some kind of change, this is sort of where we're planning on being for the state finals. You know, absent spectators watching people launch or weigh in. So we're going to talk in a minute about how we're going to try to make the weigh-ins available to folks. We'll get to that here shortly. One thing we have begun communicating to the schools, and we'll continue to do that, need your help as well, is communicating that on the day of the sectional, schools should only bring to the event those people that are on one of their rosters. I know sometimes a school may have a team of, for example, 15 or 20 students on the day of the sectional. Everybody gets to come. They're all in their jerseys, even though only 8 might do the actual fishing. This year, we're just not going to have that luxury. We only want folks coming to the event who are going to participate. So we need to communicate that. And tied into that, I think it's going to be important that you emphasize to coaches that they sort of create an area where it's like that's their home base. In my mind, I think about events like track and cross country, where maybe if you've been at one of those events, you know, there's 40 schools running in a cross country meet. A lot of them bring tents and they set up a home base, and that's where everybody just sort of hangs out in that teams from that team. I think we might have to adopt a similar kind of approach this year with our bass fishing. Whether people bring tents or not isn't my concern, but encourage folks, maybe it's by their bus or their trailer, whatever, that's their area, and we'd really like people to sort of be anchored there. We don't want a lot of walking around where you've got to worry about tracking people down or knowing where they're at or worried if they're interacting when they probably shouldn't be. So trying to have that sort of home base approach is going to be really critical this year. So remind everybody about that when you get them there. I think you probably want to conduct your coaches meeting with as few people as possible, and maybe it's just the head coach, again, keeping everybody spread out. If you've got room to spread people out and you have the boat captains there, that's fine. You're going to know better about how many people to have in that meeting based on how much space you have. And if you don't feel like you can keep people spaced out because your area is a little tighter, then limit that to a manageable number. We've talked about awards. Now, here's the part about how we're going to try to address allowing people to feel like they're a part of the event, even though they really won't be on site. And we're talking here about weigh-ins, and this will be something new. So we are going to create a Facebook account for each sectional tournament. And we're going to ask that those weigh-ins be streamed through the Facebook account's website, or through the going live on Facebook. So what that means is we will be creating the Facebook page, and we will begin by having our office will be listed as the administrator. And what will happen between now and the sectional, we will ask you rather to identify somebody to serve as the person who will stream the event for us, and you'll send us that person's name and email, and we'll attach that person onto the administrator for that site, so they'll be able to go, and whether they're doing it on their phone or a tablet or something else, and go live with the streaming. So we need you to identify. Maybe you've got a student, an extra student, maybe you've got a student journalist, somebody that can stay distant from the stage and still make that experience for everybody. We did a similar thing just the other weekend with our badminton state finals. So this will just be on a little bit bigger scale because we'll have 25 of these links people will be able to go to. And we'll be creating a how-to, even if your person isn't very techy, we'll be creating a little how-to document for that person, so that on the day of the sectional, when it gets to be time for weigh-ins, they'll be able to follow. It's really a couple of steps is all they got to do. Be able to point and shoot a camera, whether it's on a phone or a tablet, and they'll be able to go live and show the world what's happening at your location with weigh-ins. So really the key for you as manager is maybe in the next week or two, identify who that person is, and you can email me that person's name and email address, and then we'll begin collecting those and communicating directly with those folks, making sure they're named an administrator on the right Facebook page. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and unmute everybody. That's really what I wanted to cover. There are always some good questions, so I'm going to unmute folks, and then we'll see if you guys and gals have any questions. Just give me a second. I don't know that I want to stop sharing. Come on. Here we go. Here, let's try this. Oh, where did I find? Well, how about if you guys just, if anybody has a question, how about you just unmute yourself and ask it? Let's do that. I'll let you guys unmute yourselves.
Kurt, can you hear us?
I can, yes.
Pete Robertson and Joel
Hi,
Erickson
Pete.
were from Durand High School. How are you guys doing?
Oh, we're good. Yeah, how about there in Northern Illinois?
We're doing great up here. It
good.
Finally broke. We had 70-degree weather this weekend, and it's a little rainy this week, but that's okay. We have a couple questions. The first one that Joel and I were thinking about is, we see a student athlete without a mask on in the boat, or a coach. Are we addressing it? Are we not addressing it? How are we handling those situations when we see masks not being worn?
Sure. I should have probably prefaced my talk, or during my talk when I was touching a little bit on the COVID situation. When you're getting the boats ready to go out, we fully expect that in many cases, and every boat's different, but we expect in many cases that people are going to be sitting side by side. We're not expecting people at that moment to be socially distant from one another.
Yep.
We do expect them to have masks on. So I could envision many scenarios unfolding around the state where people will be sitting side by side with one another, ready to go out wherever it is they're going to fish. When they get to wherever they're going to fish, that's when we expect people to spread out on the boat and be able to maintain that distance from one another with their masks up. If you see people not wearing their masks, you should address it. Similar to like we've done in other sports. And people will need to be masked. I don't know at what point though, Pete, I know that's the $1 million question. At what point does it become something where we say, okay, they're just being obstinate and we're going to have to look to take some additional action? I don't have that answer today. I think we just want to emphasize to folks, you need to get your mask on, you need to be masked, and you need to encourage folks to do that if at any point in time you don't see that happening. I would always say that if you find people who are habitually not following whatever the guidance is, that would be something I'd want to know so I can try to do any kind of provide any kind of assistance I can, either day of or later if that boat were to qualify for our state finals.
Well, when Joel and I were talking this morning, bass fishing, along with some other activities in sports, there is an element of trust and there's an element of integrity where, these guys or gals are out on the boat, nobody around. They could have 6, 7 fish in their well, but for the most part, we've experienced most people following the rules to a T. They're wonderful people, these bass fishing guys and gals, and
right.
I don't think it's going to be a problem, Kurt, but we just want to make sure that we do what we're supposed to, and we'll address it as we always do, and hopefully they'll adhere to the expectations, and we can kind of move on. So.
And that also sort of ties, I agree, first of all, Pete, it harkens back a little bit to maybe something I referenced. We've had a lot of communication with the state this year on all these topics, including masking. And if anything were to change in regards to that between now and certainly the 6th, we'll communicate that to folks. We're hopeful. We've been told, dramatic pause for effect there, that there could be some loosening of mask restrictions for some outdoor activity. We don't know what that means. I'm hopeful, fingers crossed, that that could mean something good for bass fishing. But if not, we've got a plan. But if something does change, we'll let folks know about that.
Joel had a question about the equipment.
Okay.
Mr. Gibson, I've been asked by a couple different coaches whether they can use Garmin Panoptics or Humminbird Mega Live, which shows the fish in live time. My response was, I don't see anything in the terms and conditions. Are you familiar with anything of that nature, or is there anything coming down the pipes that I can pass on to these coaches?
I would agree with your assessment. I'm not aware of any restriction against using that kind of equipment. So what am I missing today?
My understanding is that based on these coaches' questions, that it gives the teams that have the bigger dollar amounts to have the more expensive fish finding equipment on their boats, which is historically, hey, you got a different depth finder than Team B.
Right.
Again, I don't have their answer. This is newer technology that's come out, and if you have a team that has a family member or coach that has quite an exorbitant budget, great, they have this equipment on there, where you may not have some schools that have that type of financial backing that may.
Right.
I guess their thought was trying to keep the field at a level playing field.
Kurt, this is Eric Frederickson from Reed Custer.
Yeah, hi, Eric.
I don't want necessarily mean to cut you off, but I can recall that we talked about this at the advisory committee, if you'd like me to answer and address that.
Sure.
One of the things that we've talked about is that you're exactly right. The playing field isn't always leveled as far as equipment and boats, but my recollection is that when we talked about it as far as advisory committee, there really wasn't any way to police it. And it just kind of was, unfortunately, the circumstances with which we're dealt. So I agree with Kurt that I don't think there's anything in the rules as far as the Panoptics and the higher priced units. And again, it's just kind of one of those deals where it's the unfortunate circumstances that some schools find them in.
Right. So does that help? You can go back to those folks and let them know that those are not, that's not illegal equipment. It's something they can use.
Thank you for updating that, and I'll pass that on to the coaches that have asked that question.
Very good. Thank you.
Kurt, I did have one more thing that I was had a question about. In regards to the mask wearing, is that something that, based on the state guidelines, we're pretty much assuming that that's kind of going to be a rule for this year anyways, because it's obviously a state mandated requirement? Is that something that if a team observed another team with their masks down, and maybe they did the courtesy of, hey guys, let's get our masks up, and they're kind of self-regulating, but as you mentioned, it got to the point where the team was just kind of obstinate. My thought is that would probably be something that would need to go through an official appeals, like any other rule. Is that?
I agree.
What you would feel would be appropriate at that point?
I do. Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yep. I think if it gets to be something of that nature, then that's the avenue to follow with addressing it. Let me check let's see anything in chat. So I'll be happy to stick around. I'm going to stop sharing my screen. There we go there. So as I mentioned, got a copy of this that we'll be making available tomorrow. We will follow up with an email that will remind you about finding a person. You're going to just get a name and an email address for us and let us know who that streamer will be. We're going to create the Facebook page, and then we're going to give that person some control to be able to do some live streaming on the day of the sectional for your weigh-in. That'll be tomorrow. You're going to hear more about that tomorrow. You're also going to get the supplement that'll help you administer the event. Then the following week, next week, we'll be sending you some information. That'll be the one-page handouts that you can give to the 3 qualifying boats and the alternate boat. That's your 4th place boat on the day of the sectional. And that's sort of their first notice about the state finals from our office. So thanks again to everybody for joining us. And like I said, I'll hang around for a few minutes if you've got a couple of questions that come to mind. I'm going to stop my recording though. And otherwise, if you don't have any questions,